The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. Bock score from Nedick's at the Old Garden on 49th Street with Hal Bock. Hal, we have a terrific panel as usual. We have George Case III. Hello, George.
Hi there, everybody.
All right, and we have David Hubler.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening, David. And we have my dear old self, Ralph Tyko, Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I get to ask Hal in my New York accent, which is hardly distinguishable anymore after all these years on the West Coast. But I get to ask, what's the score, Hal?
Well, tonight the score is another wrinkle that they've given us in the evolution of baseball. The wrinkle is called the bullpen game, and it involves the pitching rotations for teams. They've used it in the playoffs a couple of times. It was used during the regular season. It involves, instead of having a starting pitcher who would go 7 or 8 innings, maybe 9 in the old days, they start the game with a reliever, sometimes the closer. And he pitches an inning, maybe 2, and then it's turned over to another reliever, and on like that. Well, that means that you're going to use 6 or 7 pitchers to cover 9 innings. When we were young and carefree, the starting pitcher was expected to cover 9 innings. And the result of this bullpen game that they've come up with is burned out bullpens, because you're using pitchers every night. And that's not healthy for the arms of these relief pitchers. And it came to fore in the playoffs in the wild card game here in New York when the Oakland Athletics started a guy named Liam Hendricks out of their bullpen. He's got a career record of 12 and 22, I think. He was 0-1 this season. He was designated for assignment at mid-year. So he's not exactly the number 1 pitcher on that staff, but he was given the assignment in an elimination game, a game that they had to win. He walked the first batter, and the next batter up was Aaron Judge, and he hit a 2-run homer, and the A's never came back. They lost the game 7-2. So I just don't get it. I mean, I know I'm old-fashioned, old school, and I love the game that I learned back in the 40s and 50s. But I don't understand this strategy, and maybe one of you guys can figure it out and explain it to me or defend it. But for me, a starting pitcher is expected to go 6, 7, 8 innings, and then you close the game with your closer, and that's it. But it's changed. The game has changed, not in the best way as far as I'm concerned. So I'll ask you guys what you think of the bullpen game.
Well, may I lead off and just note that the 2 teams that used that system this year the most, the one team the most really was the Rays, and they had a terrific year doing it, and they passed it on to the A's, who used it sporadically during the year, and they had a great year. So the idea is that a pitcher doesn't get to face a lineup more than once or twice. And how it works, I don't know. Do they have statistics of how many runs are scored in games where they use the bullpen as opposed to a regular starting pitcher? I'll ask you guys that.
I have not seen that yet. But I'll tell you this, if I'm a manager and I have my choice of an ace, a guy who's won 20 games or 15 games or something like that, I don't want a bullpen guy opening the game. I want my ace opening the game. I want to start with the best I have. And that apparently no longer is the case.
It is the case if you have an ace, but if you don't have an ace, because you fought your way into the playoffs, as an example, like the A's did, and they were also decimated with injuries, going with that could be their only hope. It didn't work out this time, but I don't. It's just the opening said changing the game. It bastardizes the game. What it does.
They couldn't do better than pitch a guy who was designated for assignment in July, who spent July and August in the minor leagues. That's the best you have to offer me?
Well, he wasn't put in because he was the best. He was put in as a stopgap until you could get to the better guys.
Well, that doesn't make any sense, though. You know, I could see it. I could see it in a one-game playoff like the game with the Yankees, simply because you either have to win or you're going home. So you can try anything you possibly can to win that game, and then hopefully, right the ship, so to speak. But there are a couple of other issues that I find interesting with this whole situation. Number one, Major League Baseball for the last several years has been trying to figure out crazy ways to speed up the game. Well, bringing in 6 different pitches over 9 innings doesn't really speed up the game, does it? It just helps the commercials, the advertisers rather, to show more commercials. And you
wonder if that's what they're really looking for.
Well, I don't think that devious. However, it's possible. But the other thing is, if this becomes a trend. Let's say that becomes a trend. What you're dealing with then, and all the major league teams adapt this situation, what you've got is practically a 2-platoon baseball team. You've got a bunch of pitchers and you've got a bunch of fielders. I mean, it's absurd. You're going to have to increase the player limit from 25 to say 30. Because you're going to need all these pitches in the course of a 9-inning game, and Hal was right. He said, what happens, if the game goes into extra innings? You got to bring in an infielder or somebody that has never pitched to pitch the last crucial innings of the game. I think I can understand what the A's did for one game, but to make this sort of the new baseball is really absurd.
Well, the Rays have been doing
it
all year. Not just, and they won like 90 games doing it. So that's where I want to see some sort of statistical comparison to how teams do when they do that and how teams do when they have to pitch their 5th pitcher as opposed to the bullpen.
Well, underlying this whole thing is this new unwritten rule that a pitcher never gets to a third bat around. You don't want to give away all your pitches. Well, for years and years, there were pitchers who pitched 8, 9, 10 innings. Whitey Ford, Sandy Koufax, all of these great pitchers. They knew how to pace themselves. So by the time the third batting, the order came around the third time, they still had, a weapon or two left that they've been holding on to. It's preposterous what they're doing now.
A savvy pitcher doesn't pitch a batter the same way.
Right. Yeah.
I may get you out with fastballs in the first inning. You may not see a fastball in the 3rd or 4th inning. You might see my sliders and my curves and so forth. It's a game. That's what the beauty part of the game is. It's a cerebral game. Only people don't seem to realize that. There's
and
a lot about
beautiful because the batter is setting up the pitcher in much the same way. Willie used to look bad on a certain pitch.
Yeah, that's why Hal calls it a cerebral game.
Get that pitch later on in the game when it really meant something because the pitcher thought, well, I fooled him on that one. Willie had it in his back pocket, if you will. So, it alleviates the strategy from both sides, pitching and batting. Again, bastardizing the game.
Can I put in my Can I put in my 2 cents on this whole thing?
Of course.
Well, I'm with Hal. I'm with David, Ralph. I'm with you guys. I mean, I'm a baseball traditionalist. I pitched. I started. I also relieved, and I'm only telling you from a from a ball player's point of view, there's a totally different scenario in your head when you're a starting pitcher and when you come in to relieve. Believe me, it's different. And if you take a guy like a Mariano Rivera, who was probably the greatest closer of all, you put him in a starting position, he's not going to like it, number one, because you're not pitching. I mean, he's not pitching to his strength. Now, a lot of guys will say, hey, this is the new thing that are going to be in baseball. Well, pitch counts a couple of years ago were the new thing in baseball, and now everybody does it. Well, in an earlier era, nobody worried about pitch counts. The starters were there. They were supposed to start and finish the game. I think 2 weeks ago there was something on Facebook about Tom Chaney and his 16-inning, 21 strikeout performance back in 1962 with expansive centers. He threw 224 or 230 pitches, and nobody was counting pitches. And Mickey Vernon and Sid Hudson went out to Chaney a couple times, and Chaney said to them, hey, I want to finish what I started. And that's what he did. So to me, now you're looking at pitch count. So what are you going to have? You're going to have a guy, instead of having 200 pitches or 100 pitches, he's now going to be pitching 1 inning. He maybe will pitch 20 pitches. And the next guy come along, and the next guy come along. And then what do you do with your starters? I mean, when you've used up, like Hal says, you used up your bullpen. Now you've got 5 good arms, or so-called good arms, because they were supposed to be starters. And now what are they? They're going to be relegated to the bullpen. What's the rotation going to be? I just don't, personally, as an old school baseball guy, I don't like it, and I hope that is a short-lived kind of phenomenon, because I think it's really hurting the game, personally.
I think George has touched on something very, very important. I was once told by one of the best pitchers in the history of the game, Tom Seaver, that it's consistent. Baseball is consistency. It's doing the same thing not only once but twice or 3 times, and on and on and on, being able to do it again and again. And pitchers have, and do hitters, they have mental setups in their heads about how to succeed. And a starter's point of view, a starting pitcher's point of view, is not the same as a reliever's point of view. We had a guy here in New York who's now in Oakland, Jeurys Familia. Jeurys Familia could not come into a game with runners on base. He was a great relief pitcher for them, but he had to start an inning. If he was brought in with runners on base, it was disaster, because he was not accustomed to that circumstance, to that situation. So, ball players are mental creatures as well as physical creatures. And I think what George said, and I think he touched on a very important point, is that pitcher's point of view, pitcher's mental setup, starting pitchers, is different from a relief pitcher. And how do you change that? How do you turn a relief pitcher into a starting pitcher? It's very dangerous, I think. So that's just my perspective.
Well, Hal, I agree with you, and you touched on it in your piece when they don't call them starters now; they call them openers.
Right.
I mean, you're really.
Well, that's a matter of semantics. I don't think there's any.
Yeah,
difference.
no, I agree, David. It is semantics. I mean, it's crazy, but that individual. You call him an opener. I don't care what you call him, but he is a relief pitcher, and now you're getting him to start the game, and I don't like it. And, maybe this is going to be the latest trend, but all I know, in many, many years ago, guys pitched long time. How about the guys who went like Bob Feller, no-hitters, and you got guys like Nolan Ryan, no-hitters, and Sandy Koufax, no-hitters. And then you had the situation where guys were really out there to pitch. And Don Larson's perfect game. Now, you're going to tell me that he couldn't have gone more than those 9 innings? I don't believe it.
Hey, how about Marichal and Spahn going at it?
Well, sure. Ralph, that's another example. Those two guys, what was it, 15 or 16 inning games or whatever it was, and Marichal said, I'm not going to come out until the old guy comes out. I mean, but that's what started. That's the mentality of a starting pitcher. That's what they're paid to do. They're not paid to be sitting around in the bullpen waiting that they're going to get a call, because they're not. They're a starting pitcher. Now, what are they going to do? They're going to designate everybody now as pitchers, period? Now you have your openers, you have your middle guys, you have your closers. What about your starting pitchers? Who's the starting pitcher? Do you have any? Probably not. Now you got 10 guys in the bullpen.
Let me touch on something George said about Familia coming in with runners on base, and I'm going to ask George for your expertise as a pitcher, because it's different pitching from the stretch than from pitching from
the windup.
Well, yeah, it is. It is.
Now,
a lot of guys, Ralph, you're absolutely right.
What's in Familia's head? I'll ask Hal first. Is that a possibility that that's part of what's in Familia's head, not wanting to come in with runners on? And because nobody on the Mets is famous for holding runners anyway. And I'll ask George to elaborate on the difference between pitching from the stretch and pitching from the windup and how that affected you when you pitched.
You know, Ralph, I got to tell you, my understanding is that Familia was making about $7 or $8 million this year. And if you pay me $7 or $8 million, I'll figure it out, how to pitch from the stretch or how to pitch from a windup. I mean, that's your job. Figure it out. You're a relief pitcher. Sometimes you may come in with runners on base. I mean, to me, it's, I don't know. I just.
And you've got a pitching coach, and you've got all the staff. Nobody there can help teach them or help with and work on it.
I don't understand it, David.
No, I don't either.
Well, I'm with you guys, and you know, from me just being an old pitcher, I mean, I just know that. And back when I pitched, we went from a full windup. Today they go from a set position. They don't even use a full windup.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is that a lot of guys, if they're pitching, they do not like to pitch, as Hal and you guys have talked, with a runner on base, because that runner can distract them. I mean, that's what the runner's job is to do, is to distract that pitcher. All of a sudden, he's worried about that guy on first base, or he's worried about the guy on second base. You know, it's totally different than if you're a starter and you're concentrating and you're trying to get that first, side out of the inning. That's what your job is. Get a good start, get those guys out, and then hopefully your team's going to come back and start scoring a few runs. But to me, it's just totally different mental game when you're worrying about a guy on first base or second base, the runners, because their job is to distract. And all of a sudden now you're starting to throw over to first base. You're really losing your concentration as to what you're up there to do, and that's to pitch the ball to the batter. That's what you're paid to do.
I'll tell you a story.
That's what a starter does.
When I was a kid, I grew up, as Ralph knows, I grew up as a Giants fan, which meant that I hated the Dodgers. And the Dodgers had a player, a fellow named Jackie Robinson. And he would get on first base, and we would have a left-handed pitcher, maybe Dave Kozlow, maybe Monty Kennedy, a left-handed pitcher who's facing first base.
Right.
Robinson would dance off first base to the point where the pitcher was completely distracted and thrown off his game, and the next thing you know, there's a double or a triple, and off we go, So you're absolutely right, George. The runner at first base can distract the pitcher and throw him off his game and cause all kinds of mayhem. And Jackie Robinson did that every time. Made me crazy when I watched him do that.
Yeah, Hal, Jackie was a master of that. And, he would do it at first base. He would do it at third base. I mean, he'd be charging down the line, doing all that kind of stuff. But it was all designed to break the concentration of the pitcher, because when you're playing ball, you're trying to focus, and your focus is on what your job is. And if you're a starting pitcher, your job is to get those guys out. If you're a reliever, you're all of a sudden now you're worrying about that daggone guy, that base runner, and maybe you didn't even put him on. I mean, the guy before you might have put him on, and now all of a sudden you're in there. And so,
it's a mental game. A lot of it is a mental game.
No question about it, Al. It's a very mental game. I've talked to people so often about, they say, oh, baseball is boring and all. And to the average fan, I guess it is, because it takes so long. But it is a cerebral game. You have to know what you're doing. And for every move, there's a counter move. And if you look out on the field, and I've sat in stands and talked to friends of mine, I said, now look how these players are positioning themselves. Look at the shortstop and the second baseman. They're signaling to each other who's going to cover the bag on a play. And then look at the way the runners, the outfielders and the infielders are positioning themselves based upon the type of, or they even change based on the pitch. I mean, if the pitcher is going to be throwing a fastball, they might be shading to the other side. If he's throwing a curveball, they might be going the other way. But that's just part of the cerebral game of baseball that people have to understand if they've ever played the game. And you talk to professionals, and they'll talk to you about what the game means to them, the mental part of baseball.
You know, I want to go back to something David said a second ago about isn't there anybody that can coach them along the way? Well, you know, the Mets have been having trouble for 3 or 4 years in a row now, holding runners on. Couldn't they find a way of having some sort of an instructional league type thing in spring training, devote more time to teaching these guys, even in the minors on the way up? Shouldn't they be instructing these guys how to hold runners on and how to when to concentrate on it and whatnot? That's where the game has changed.
A couple of weeks ago we talked about what I consider to be for me, the most memorable game that I ever watched or heard, and that was Bobby Thompson's home run. That ninth inning was set up when Alvin Dock led off with a hit, and the Dodgers were winning 4-1, and Gil Hodges held Dock to first base inexplicably because Dock wasn't going to hurt anybody.
Right.
Instead of playing the position the normal way, he held him. Don Mueller, who was the next hitter, saw that, and he positioned. Don Mueller they called him Mandrake the Magician. He could hit the ball anywhere, and he saw that Hodges had left a big hole between first and second, and he hit the ball between first and second, got a base hit, and off we go. But that's what we were talking about a moment ago. That's the cerebral part of the game, watching that and seeing that and saying, wow, I can take advantage of that. Or why did he do that? That's the cerebral part of the game. And the great Red Smith, the great columnist Red Smith, Pulitzer Prize winner, once said baseball is dull to dull people. And I agree with him.
Yes. I've said that to people who say it's a dull game. Right. Absolutely. And the other thing,
it won't be dull.
That's the other thing that annoys knowing fans. Like you take Mark Teixeira, never, ever went to the left side. Despite the fact that it was wide open, maybe there was a third baseman leading toward shortstop, they shifted to the right side. They could have put all 8 players on the right side, and he still would have hit down the first, tried to get between first and second.
And
that's not right. That's
the left side, but he certainly could stick his bat out and bunt,
Yeah, that's right.
Well, that's the other thing you
cerebral.
talked about. You're talking, Ralph and Hal and David, you're talking about not being able to hold runners. Well, again, a fundamental thing. But there's an example. Hey, if you want to move a runner over, bunt. But how many guys in the major leagues today can bunt? Because they don't know how to bunt. Nobody ever works on it. Nobody ever practices. You guys are such a few number of bunters, and now when you've got the DH in the American League, I can tell you those DHs aren't going up there to bunt.
No,
but it's just a different world, and to me the fundamentals are lacking. I mean, I've said all along, I think the players are much more skilled, they're stronger, they're faster, whatever, but they are lacking in the fundamentals of the game. And what you're saying, Hal, about hitting behind the runner or hitting to an opening in the field, that's what they should do. Instead, they're up there trying to jack one out. And that is losing the cerebral part of the game.
And walks.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what the game has become. And that, if you want to know about dull, that to me is dull. Home runs, strikeouts, and walks. I'd rather see a single, a stolen base, maybe an infield out, and maybe a sacrifice fly. That's a way to build a run.
Right.
But they don't build runs anymore. That's not done.
Well, the other thing is it's not going to get any better as far as I can see, simply because they're now hiring managers who aren't, who don't stress the fundamentals of the game. They stress the statistics of the game. They're all looking at, the analytics. That's too big. That's why Joe Girardi was let go. He wasn't an analytics man. Now, the interesting thing about Girardi is, if I remember, he had like a master's in mathematics or economics, so certainly he could understand what those figures were. But according to what I've read in the New York papers, he couldn't communicate with his ball players. Maybe because he tried to teach them fundamentals. Rather than the launch angle or some of those abbreviations. I don't even know what they mean.
Escape velocities, David.
Yeah. So. I don't even know what those numbers mean.
I don't know what they mean either, but that's what and how you mentioned it so many times in your articles. I mean, that's the new jargon in baseball. You have all these launch angles, spin velocities, WAR, and all these crazy terms. I don't even know what they belong in. I can tell you that players, you're out there to play the damn game. You're not worrying about all that kind of stuff. And yet, the analysts who are really taking over in baseball, as far as I'm concerned, they're feeding all those things into a manager's head or instead of being on the field in the dugout and analyzing what's going on, they're looking at the computer printouts.
Exactly.
And, those statistics are based on either long-term or short-term. They're not based on how the player is today. What is his disposition like? Did he sleep last night? Is he hurting? These things can only be determined by a manager that will look into a player's eyes, talk and communicate with the player, and not just check it off, well, you went 4 for 20 against this guy last year, so we're going to use those as a determination, not what you're doing this week or today. And I wonder if the Yankees, if they had it to do all over again, given the way the season ended so abruptly for them, might not have been better served to have kept Girardi.
Well, they won 100 games. They won 102 games. So, that's right. Not a bad season. That's a pretty successful year. Now, the problem I have, and maybe some other time I'll write about it, I don't know. I am not a fan of wild card baseball because when you play 162 games, that's a measure of how good you are and whether you deserve to be in the postseason. And the postseason for me is not a single game, win or you're done, win one and done. I don't like that. I think it's unfair to the team that loses. Give me a chance. Let it be 2 out of 3 at least. But
right.
One game.
Cut the season shorter, just maybe a week, so that you can get that in. A few more double headers in the middle of the summer, something along those lines. Give the fans a little more than they get for their money. A couple of Sunday afternoon.
How rare it is when there's a double header. You say a few more.
Yeah.
Well,
now they have
it's almost something today. They don't do them, and the only time they do a double header anymore is if there's a rain out or whatever. But
right.
Or they have 2 admissions. They have a day night. They have an admission for the day. They have an admission for the night. And in an earlier era, teams were playing 30, 40 doubleheaders a year. And now you don't even have it. And I agree with you guys as far as the season. They could start the season if they wanted to. They could start it later. The first week in April, half the time the doggone games are being snowed out, rained out, whatever. The weather in the first week in April around the country, other than the Sun Belt, is terrible. And in a lot of places in this country, colleges and so forth, they're playing later schedules, or they're playing what they call fall baseball because the weather is so much better than it is in the early months of the year in the Northeast and the Midwest.
Yeah, but I think they should end it sooner rather than start it later.
And David, maybe they could end it sooner. I mean, you could certainly, as you're talking about, you could do some double headers, or you can do some things.
Yeah, that would give you a chance to have a best 2 out of 3.
No question, it would. And instead, now you're making the season extend into November, so you're starting in snow and you're ending in snow. I mean, to me, it's crazy.
A couple of years ago, the Mets and the Giants met in the wild card game, and Noah Syndergaard matched up with Baumgarten of the Giants. It was a great pitchers duel, and they went at each other for 8 innings, and it was a scoreless game. And then they brought in my friend Familia in the 9th inning. He gave up 3 runs, and the game was over, and so was the Mets season. Well, wait a minute. It was 1 inning,
Right.
And it didn't seem fair to me that you accomplish a lot over the 6-month season, enough that you get into the postseason, and then it's all decided essentially in that game in 1 inning. And I don't know, it just doesn't seem fair to me.
Yeah, it's sort of like sudden death,
Yeah.
Maybe
I agree.
they're looking at it, you're not really in the postseason until you win that game.
That's right. You're right. They call it the postseason, but it's not. It's a play-in game.
It is. It's a play-in.
It's like we have in the NCAA tournament now.
Exactly. I was just going to say that. That's exactly the same premise in NCAA basketball. You have a play-in, so they could hit that magic number of 64 teams or whatever it is. You get the odd number. They got to have that play-in game, to make the March Madness. That's what they do.
But if you call it a playoff game, you get all the revenue of the TV revenue of a playoff game. You get to charge more for tickets and whatever. And it all comes back to it. All these decisions are being made over money.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I believe you're right.
Oh, sure.
No, you're absolutely right, Ralph. No question.
But there you go. There again, if you drop the sudden death 1-game playoff to a best 2 out of 3, you've got 2 more admissions.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
True.
Hey, you guys are old schoolers. Let me call your attention to something. In the playoffs, the Dodgers are playing Houston, or the Dodgers are playing Milwaukee.
Milwaukee, right? Yeah.
Used to be an American League team. In the other playoffs, Houston is playing. Houston used to be a National League team.
Yeah.
They're playing Boston. It's really weird.
Very offensive to me that the 2 National League teams played in the World Series last year, Houston and the Dodgers. I couldn't get through that. I can't get past that. Houston is a National League ball club. And they just one day decided, no, they're going to play in the American League. So, I mean, they keep monkeying with my sport, Ralph, and I don't
what do you think of this interleague game?
Milwaukee, they decided because of C-League and his juice and his daughter owning the team, put him in the National League. Well, that really screws things up.
But what about what I just said? This whole notion of interleague play all throughout the season.
Oh, I hate that.
That's terrible. Yes.
That is awful. It is.
It's just
every day there's an interleague game because the leagues are unbalanced.
Exactly.
One more.
And somebody pointed out that this is the only sport we have, of the 4 major sports, the only sport we have that plays its championship with 2 sets of rules. The designated hitter is used in the American League city, and the designated hitter sits down in the National League city. Well, to me, first of all, I hate the designated hitter, but that's another story. American League teams are built around it with a designated hitter. To take that position away is not fair to the American League team, in my opinion.
Yeah, and especially if it's 4 games. If it's they might lose it for 4 games.
That's right. And that's an integral part of the American League team's attack. And all of a sudden, they don't have it. Now, how can you have that? You can't have two sets of rules. And yet, this has been going on since 1973. That's a long time ago.
Yeah.
You know what I'm afraid of? When they make it one set of rules, it'll be it'll be a designated hitter in both leagues. That
I'm afraid you're right.
Well, I think it will be. Absolutely, I think it will be, Ralph. You know, I don't like the DH. I do not like interleague play. You know, because to me it's ruined the All-Star game, and it's crazy. It takes all the suspense out of it. But you know, the DH I absolutely hate. But I agree. I think come whatever they're going to do at some point, the National League is going to adopt the DH, and that's what you're going to have. You're not going to have two sets of rules, which I would prefer no sets of rules. I'd prefer them to go back the way it used to be, but that's not going to happen either.
That's not going to happen.
Well, somebody said, I'm paraphrasing, but somebody said, baseball must be a great game because look how the owners try to kill it.
It survives them. It really does.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a moment because it is such a great game and nothing's going to kill it. Let's take a moment to talk about one of the things about today's game that is so far superior than when we were growing up. We wouldn't believe it, and that's the defense. These guys play some defense that is spectacular. Every inning of every game I watch, there's something happening where you go, these guys are acrobats. And that's one thing about the game today that I really appreciate.
Yes, I agree with you completely. Some of these outfield catches that are just unbelievable. I mean, you think of the size of that ball coming out at 100 and something miles an hour, and these guys not only can track it down, but make these unbelievable catches against the fence, off the wall, on their shoe tops. I mean, it's amazing. It truly is. And the speed at which a third baseman or a shortstop can throw that ball back to first, I find astounding.
Well, the athletes are better today than they ever were.
I will cite a throw by Bergman tonight after he kind of bobbled the ball a little, a very hard hit ball.
That was last night, wasn't it?
Might have been. But no, I think it was today. I'm watched a little bit of the game before we came on.
Oh.
Bergman, it could have been any night. You're right, because these guys make plays like that all the time.
Yeah.
To give baseball some kudos, there are things, of course, that we're going to miss. I miss when a manager has to make a decision whether or not to pinch hit for a pitcher. Because
there you go. Say hello to the designated hitter.
Who is he going to face the next inning, and who are they going to bring in?
That's National League baseball. That's the cerebral part that's missing from the American League.
Cerebral part of the game, exactly.
Yeah. You got a pitcher that's throwing maybe a two-hitter, and they need a run.
Watch American League games because that part of the game is missing. And
yeah,
to
completely.
Me, it's an integral part of the game. And again, that's the cerebral part of baseball. That's what makes baseball so interesting. And they move on, they take it out,
And, getting back to the time involved of changing pitchers 6 times, and something's got to be done about that. Either you change pitchers once an inning, or unless there's an injury, or I don't know. But you got 14-man pitching staffs.
Yeah,
sometimes.
That's right. That's right.
It's crazy. Thank God for the defense. How about that?
Well, you know what, Ralph and David and Hal, I just want to mention one thing about defense. I absolutely agree. The players, and I've said it before, they're much more skilled, they're more acrobatic, they're faster, quicker, whatever. But they also, you have improvement in the gloves. And guys have pointed out to me, I mean, I have pictures, and I've got my dad and when he played, and I've got his old glove. I mean, and when the baseball in the very early days, the baseball glove was about as big as your size of your hand. I mean, now you've got huge gloves. So a player, if he's quicker, if he's faster, if he's acrobatic, he can go up and he can make those sensational plays, whether it be in the outfield or in the infield, and because not only do they have the range, but they've got the tools. It's just like in golf and in tennis when they had all these equipment changes. And, now you've got guys in tennis, nobody plays with wooden tennis rackets anymore. They play with aluminum, and they play with composite, and they play with big heads and all that kind of stuff. In golf, they've got the new clubs, and it's just a different game because you've got the equipment. So you have to look at the equipment, which has also helped those players in the field.
How about footwear?
And footwear, yeah. Hey, it's part of it. It's part of the equipment evolution, and that's why all the companies are trying to get new products out there that's going to improve. But I'm with you guys. I mean, I much prefer the way the game used to be before they started tinkering around with it. But I do give credit to the players today themselves because some of them, their play is absolutely sensational.
Right, true. And then they say now a lot of the outfielders are using bigger gloves than the infielders. It's easier to catch somebody's, lunging for balls, whereas the infielders need a bit more control over the glove.
Well, they do, and David, a lot of people, if they've been around baseball, you have your guy. The smallest glove is always the second baseman because he's got to get rid of the ball. He's got to make that ball exchange. The third baseman has a pretty good sized glove. The shortstop usually has a bigger glove because he's got to make a lot of plays in the hole. So the outfielders are pretty much all using big gloves, but they use what they call open webs. And the pitchers use the same size glove, but they have what they call a closed web because that conceals the way the grip or the pitch that the pitcher's going to throw from the batter. He can't see it. So if you look closely in baseball, and you'll see those differences in the gloves. But again, you have to be part of the game and to understand a little bit more about what we're talking about, the cerebral part of the game. I can tell you that there's no outfielder in Major League Baseball would ever use a glove that is used by a second baseman. They just wouldn't do it.
Right. Yeah. They need that little extra bit, or they may need it. There was a guy, Butler, who had a glove. He was an outfielder with the Giants and the Dodgers, if I'm not mistaken. And he used an oversized glove. And I remember that the umpires coming out and measuring it and throwing him and his glove out one day. So,
well, remember when catchers used to have more like a cushion.
Sure.
There was no thumb, It was much harder to catch the ball.
A glove with him when he come out of the bullpen, an oversized glove, and he would give it to Triendos, the Orioles catcher.
Yeah,
it was Paul Richards. He developed the over for Triendos, so Triendos could catch Hoyt Wilhelm's knuckleball.
That's exactly right.
And then that was later outlawed, and now you've got regulations. You've got size. So a catcher's mitt has to be a certain size. Infielders, outfielders, and in the old days too, a lot of the outfielders, they used to have a web that would extend above the fingers. So if they wanted to snare a ball, they could do it. Now today, all gloves, the webs have to extend no further than the fingertips. So that's part of the regulations that they put with equipment.
I didn't know that.
Right.
I didn't either. That's something.
Now, there's a pitcher recently, I forget who it was, but he had the largest glove I'd ever seen. And in fact, even the announcers made mention of it. He looked like it was a clown glove. They let him pitch with it. But I don't remember who it was.
That could be, David. I don't know the instance, but it could be that the manager. I think that the manager could, tell the umpire to go out, just like on a spitball or whatever. They'll go out and check.
Tar on the bat.
But they do have certain size measurements. And if you'll watch baseball today, whenever you do a close up on a pitcher, you look. And again, I don't want to belabor this, but you look and you're going to see that pitcher is facing the batter with a closed web because he's got his ball inside that, so the batter cannot tell what his grip is. But that's what they do. That's what the glove companies, whether it be Rawlings or or Wilson or SSK or Mizuno, whoever it is, they make those gloves specifically for the job that they're done, whether it be pitching, outfield, or being an infielder. And then the two gloves that are very similar, which is your catcher's mitt and your first baseman's mitt, are both, gloves that are made almost identical. The thing about a catcher's mitt, he's got a little bit extra padding, but they've got that snap figure that, so you can get the ball out quickly, or you can dive for it, and you dive for it with whether it be a catcher or whether it be a first baseman. That's the way they make them. Right. Yep.
And here's something interesting, that the glove companies will pay pitchers more to put a Wilson glove, for instance, on their hand, because they're, given the way the game is, their glove is photographed, pitchers' gloves are photographed more than the other position players.
Well, they are.
So, yeah.
You look at, Ralph, you're absolutely right. You look at a close-up of a glove, and that's what you're going to see. You're going to see that Wilson, label on the strap, or you're going to see the Rawlings label. And the same thing with baseball bats. A long time ago, Louisville Slugger and Adirondack, they had bats, and you didn't know what they were except for the advertisement. Then quite a few years ago, Adirondack came with the idea of just putting a little dark ring on the bat. So when you see that dark ring on some of the older photographs, that was an Adirondack bat versus a Louisville Slugger that didn't have it. Just a little bit of marketing that they used to do.
Yeah, and they get guys to advertise. You'd see advertising in the magazines,
right,
where some guys would be Louisville Slugger guys. I remember Willie was an Adirondacks guy. So,
right.
What about, the wood, of course, has changed, too, because so many of the bats now just break and shatter and splinter at the first time the ball is hit, it hits the ball.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they used to use
like
most of the bats were what they call made out of ash, and
right.
A lot of the bats today are made out of maple, and they feel that they've got a less tendency to break maple bat than an ash bat. So
really,
but that again is something. At least in the major leagues, they're still using wood now.
Wood, right?
In professional baseball, you start kids in little league at 9, 10 years old, and they're playing with metal bats. And they never learn to hit a ball with a wooden bat until they get into professionals. If they're going, even through colleges, they're playing with a wooden bat.
That's right. Colleges use
it's a totally different feel.
What is the attraction of the metal bat that they adopted it?
Well, what it is, David, Hal,
it's
economics. It's economics. Yeah. That's why they do it. We used to go through, you could go through 2-3 dozen bats in a season easily with breakage, and with aluminum bat, you might have you might have 3 or 4 bats for the entire team that lasts the entire year.
Yeah,
but I've heard that's the one thing. I've heard that's the one thing that Major League Baseball will never introduce, metal bats, because the way the Major League players hit, you could kill somebody very quickly. A third baseman or first baseman, he'd stand no chance because the ball comes off that bat so quickly.
No, that's true. Absolutely true. The ball comes off a bat much faster, aluminum bat, than it does a wood bat.
And there's another aspect to this. It's very difficult for scouts to evaluate a player's ability in college because of the bats. Right. So what they're doing, they're going to these summer leagues all over the country. College leagues will come together and use wooden bats. George, I know you're familiar with these leagues.
Right. Oh, very much so. They're wooden bat leagues, and and coaches will say to a kid, they'll say, "Look, son, you want to make a career out of professional baseball, then sign up and play in a wooden bat league in the summer because you're going to have to do it." Because, Ralph, what you're saying, it's very difficult for anybody. A guy comes up, he says, "Oh, I'm a hell of a hitter." Well, he might jack one 400 feet with an aluminum bat, and he won't be able to hit it 300 feet with a wooden bat.
Or he may be being tied up with an aluminum bat. If it was a wooden bat, the pitch would break his bat. It's an aluminum bat, he gets a double.
Well, they do that because they have, you don't have the same sweet spot on the bat. And what we're always taught, and I'm sure Hal and David, if you played any baseball and you use a wooden bat, you'd stand up there and you'd always want to look and you'd always want to have the label where you could see it, because on the opposite side of the wooden bat, that's the sweet spot on the baseball. That's where you're trying to hit the ball with that bat. Now, aluminum bat is different because what you're saying about the whole thing, and a lot of them going now, and we say aluminum, a lot of them going now to composites, which are, a little bit even more advanced than an aluminum bat when it comes to the velocity and the ability to hit the ball, but they have a little bit better feel. Instead of the old days, we used to hear the crack of the bat. Now, in aluminum bat, you hear the ping of the bat.
Ping, yeah.
Right. It's a horrible sound.
It's a terrible sound, right?
I'm lucky enough to have Pac-10 baseball available to me. I'm close to Berkeley, and it's terrific. The talent is terrific, but I can't get by that ping, ping.
I know. Mm-hmm.
Hey, I just want you guys to know all I've picked up here tonight when I make my comeback, and I'm going to make it soon. I'm going to use all this information about the bats and the pings and everything. So you can look for me, the only 70-plus guy in the world, to try to make it back. How about that?
You might have me right alongside you, Ralph.
All right, we'll be doing it. I just want you to know we got 2-a-days workouts. I believe in a lot of running.
Yeah, 2-a-days for one day.
Right. Just watching it for one day. All right, guys, great show as usual. I enjoy it so much. It's the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. George Case III, David Hubler is here. I'm here, Ralph Tyko, and I get to talk to Hal Bock. I'm glad you're here, Hal. Thank you very much.
Happy to do it.
Hey, thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Good night.
Bye.
Some of you will see Sunday. Hal, you're always invited Sunday high noon.
Okay, thank you. Good night.
The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.